Let's just dive right in, shall we? Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the incredibly fascinating and highly structured ways that professionals actually define, classify, and explain human mental health. Look, whether you're coming at this from a personal, academic, or professional angle, understanding the framework of mental disorders it's incredibly empowering. We're going to break down the exact models and manuals that the field uses today to make sense of the human mind.
To do that, we've got a pretty clear roadmap today. We'll start with defining disorders, move into classifying and diagnosing them, explore the different psychological perspectives, and wrap up with interaction models. Basically, we're taking a funnel approach here. We'll start way at the top with what actually constitutes a disorder, narrow things down into specific clinical lenses, and finally zoom all the way back out to look at a holistic, interactive model.
So let's kick things off at the very top of that funnel with a really foundational question. At what point does an everyday behavior, a passing mood, or just a unique personality quirk cross the line into being a full-blown psychological disorder? It's a tricky line to draw, right? And professionals definitely don't just guess.
To figure this out, we really have to look at the objective criteria. What are the actual benchmarks professionals use to evaluate behaviors and mental processes? How do they know when intervention is actually needed? Well, according to our sources, there are three main indicators. The first is a significant deviation from what's considered healthy or normal regarding thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. But, what does that actually look like on the ground? The second point really hits the nail on the head. It's an exaggerated perception of stress. Think of it like this. It's the difference between double-checking a locked door once before you go to bed versus feeling absolutely terrified that it's open and checking it like 50 times. It's when entirely everyday situations suddenly feel highly threatening or just totally overwhelming. And finally, professionals look at deviation from social norms. If someone's behaviors or thoughts are extremely atypical or unacceptable within their specific society, that can be a major red flag. It's really the combination of these factors that signals, hey, we might need some help here.
Okay, so once a behavior is officially defined as a disorder using those benchmarks, what happens next? How do professionals standardize and classify it out there in the real world? This is where we get into diagnosis.
Now, we absolutely have to acknowledge here that diagnosing is a bit of a double-edged sword. It has both positive and negative consequences. On the plus side, obviously, a diagnosis can guide effective treatment. It can provide a massive sense of relief to someone who's just been desperately searching for answers. But flip that over, and diagnosing can also carry the really heavy weight of cultural and societal stigma. Depending on the disorder, a simple label can unfortunately expose individuals to racism, sexism, ageism, and severe discrimination. It's a powerful tool, but one that professionals have to wield with a lot of care.
To standardize these diagnoses and try to keep things as objective as possible, the field relies on two absolute heavy hitters. In the U.S., the American Psychiatric Association developed the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. You've probably heard it called the DSM. Then, on a more global scale, the World Health Organization put together the International Classification of Mental Disorders, or the ICD. The crucial takeaway here is that whether a professional is sitting in an office in New York or a clinic in New Delhi, they have a shared, standardized language. This is absolutely game-changing because it ensures consistent treatment and, practically speaking, it allows for reliable medical coding and insurance billing no matter where you go. Moving further down our funnel now, we're going to shift gears from the what and how of disorders to the why. Why do these things happen? To answer that, we need to examine the distinct psychological perspectives, basically the different lenses the professionals use to look at human behavior. But before we break down those individual lenses, we need to talk about the eclectic approach. This is super important. Modern therapy almost never relies on just one rigid theory anymore. Instead, the eclectic approach is kind of like a therapist's ultimate tool belt. Rather than saying, I only do things this one way, therapists pull techniques and theories from all sorts of different approaches, maybe mixing some cognitive behavioral techniques with a few psychoanalytic concepts to specifically tailor the treatment to the unique person sitting right in front of them. So what exactly is in that tool belt? Well, if a therapist is looking inward at the mind, they've got a few main options. Are they looking for issues rooted deep in unconscious motives and unresolved childhood conflicts? That's the psychodynamic lens. Or maybe they're looking at a lack of social support that's stopping someone from reaching their full potential. That would be humanism. Or they might switch to the cognitive perspective, which zeroes in on maladaptive thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, or emotions that are causing the person to stress right now in the present moment. And then we have the other side of the coin. If a therapist isn't looking inward at your thoughts or your childhood, they're looking outward or physically. The evolutionary perspective, for instance, suggests that certain disorders might actually stem from behaviors that historically reduced our ancestors' chances of survival. Fascinating, right? Then there's the sociocultural lens, which shifts the focus entirely onto the person's current environment, looking at maladaptive social and cultural relationship dynamics. And lastly, the biological perspective. This one doesn't care about your childhood or your culture. It is strictly looking at physiological or genetic factors. We're talking about the actual physical wiring and chemical balance of the brain itself. We've looked at all these individual lenses, but let's be real. Human beings are incredibly complex. You can't just put us in one neat little box. So let's expand our funnel all the way back out and look at interaction models, which combine all these diverse perspectives into one comprehensive framework. The perfect example of this is the biopsychosocial approach. This model basically says, look, our vulnerability to mental illness is almost never isolated to just one single cause. Instead, it's this incredibly intricate, overlapping web that rests on three main pillars. First, you've got biology. That's your physical health, your genetic vulnerabilities, maybe the effects of certain drugs. Second is your social environment, your peers, your life circumstances, your everyday relationships. And third, your psychological state, your internal coping skills, your self-esteem, your social skills. All three of these pillars are constantly interacting, kind of like a giant puzzle, to determine our overall mental health at any given moment. Which brings us to our final thought for today. Mental health really exists on a spectrum, ranging from high vulnerability on one end to mental illness being completely absent on the other. So if our mental health is truly this deeply interconnected web of biological chemistry, psychological resilience, and social environments, which of these interacting factors do you think holds the most power to shift someone away from vulnerability and toward lasting resilience? Is it nature, nurture, or how we cope? Think about that as you observe human behavior moving forward. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.